Assalamu alaikum, dear friends. Here we are with the fourth episode of The Messiah Files in English. And with me, the respected and honorable Syed Mujtaba, who is presenting all this program in English and Urdu as well. So, how are you, Shasab? And let's we start our program.
Thank you so much, Jazakumullah. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Thank you, Sheikh Saab. I have to acknowledge the fact that I get so much respect from this team, but the experience and knowledge of our team is, mashallah, really so high. I'm a researcher, as you can see here, and I'm still learning. So I'll just turn off my camera and begin the presentation now. So
Thank,
once the okay,
thank you.
perfect.
So nice. Yeah.
Um, our episode four. Thank you very much again for your support. I have looked at the number of views that we have received on the previous episodes. So you are following it carefully. Alhamdulillah. Everything is leading up to the conversation we want to have. Common sense logic, what we should do with regards to scams and so on. As we move forward, we are getting more into the actual topic of our research, and this is to discuss Mirza Ghulam Ahmad Saab, and we are presenting our arguments to that effect. So, episode four will now target more specific points with regards to this gentleman. So, our episode title is Everything Has a Start. And prior to getting into the topic itself, I'll do a short recap because it's very important. So, across cultures, we have seen that there are end of times prophecies, and that's common virtually in every part of the world. In Semitic traditions, Abrahamic faiths, we have Masih in Islam, which is Hazrat Isa alayhi salam. Jesus is the Messiah in Christianity, and the Messiah in Judaism is from the line of King David. And Islam also mentions outside of the Quran Al Mahdi, and so we have looked into different aspects of that. And all the three traditions warn the followers about false people coming in the name and claiming to be Messiah. And we've looked into that aspect, how investigating claim is part of the responsibility of everyone. Also, we've looked into the difference between a true Messiah and the Messiah complex. And the Messiah complex is basically a psychological condition in which a person believes they are divinely chosen, but they're not. It's very similar to inferiority and superiority complex. So we've discussed that. And throughout the history, people around the world have claimed to be Jesus, God-appointed leader, all of those things, and it's worldwide, and even so all over the time. And these false claimants display strikingly similar patterns. If you look at one, you probably understand what the next will do. And their claims are and behavior are very, very similar. There are differences for sure, but largely they are the same. They demand some some people don't understand this. What is the meaning of blind faith? But for the sake of argument, they demand basically for you to think how they think, do what they do, what they ask you to do, and without any evidence. And they expect the followers to financially support them and their group. And this is something we talked about. We also examined how the psychology explains Messiah complex and the methods they use to build influence. We looked at the model from the empty balloon to the burst stage. Now, we've received lots of questions regarding this, so I thought we'll just do a short recap on these points as well. Uh, I don't want to get into the long list of what true prophets behave. You already know that, but here are 5 points I thought are irrefutable. The first one is true prophets never made claims gradually, which means the moment Allah told them you are a Nabi or a Rasul, they went out and decided. They did not call themselves Masile Masih, Mujaddid, and all of those things. They were upfront with it. They've never taken the name of anyone else. So they never said, I'm Isa, I'm Musa. What their name was, they said, this is my name and I'm a Rasul. That's it. They never made claim of knowing hidden knowledge. They never said that our knowledge was hidden and we we have received any hidden knowledge from God or any verses that have been hidden from us. They never asked for any money, specifically inheritance or will or any of that sort. Donations were asked during times, yes, but they weren't required all the time. They never planted their family as part of a system for financial benefits. Exactly contrasting that is what we find in the false messiah. They always make gradual claims. They always take names of others. They always claim hidden knowledge. They always ask for money, even if it's inheritance money. Can you imagine inheritance money? They plant a self perpetuating financial system. So, the 5 points with true prophets and the 5 points of false messiah, if you just understand them, you can judge everyone. In Arabic, there's a saying. It says, what you tell me is beautiful, what I see is not. So you should open your eyes and see the differences. You should not listen to people to explain things. If it is black, if your eyes can validate it's black, then it's black. You don't need someone to tell you that's green because that means you are not in a position to trust your own eyesight. Now, we will talk today about something called red flag. And this is a very common term that is used worldwide. I'll not get into the history of it, but just generally, if you don't know what a red flag is, and I'll probably explain this to you now. A red flag is essentially representing a clear sign or warning. It's an indicator of a warning, of a potential problem. So, anything that is concerning, anything that is dangerous, you say there's a red flag in that. Now, I'll take an example to explain that to you. For instance, in health, let's say someone's having a chest pain, fatigue, or tiredness. You say, it's just stress, I'll deal with it later. But in reality, that's a red flag, which means you should now be prepared to accept the consequences. The body is warning you of something, and you need to learn and you need to appreciate that you still have time to act. So it's a red flag. In business, you'll find unclear contracts, vague terms, people who don't look genuine, who don't act responsible. But you say, no, 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 this is looking very realistic. Other people have made money. This is a good chance for me. That's a big red flag right there. And you ignored it. Now you'll have consequences. Um, we have red flags virtually every day of our life. We find them around us, but we choose to ignore them. They are very big, some of them are very small, but we continuously ignore them, whether it's in a relationship, whether it's in money matters, and so on. So, red flags are always there. Now, a red flag isn't necessarily something that you should end. The moment you find a red flag, you shouldn't panic, you shouldn't end it, but you should investigate. Simply because if you ignore a red flag, it does not go away. It just becomes better and bigger with time. So you will be dealing with a monster later. Now, I'm going to take an example of this. Imagine there's a person who's sick and is waiting for a doctor. And imagine a doctor shows up wearing this with a spanner in hand. This is an illustration. No doctor will show up this way, but this is an example of it. Immediately, it's spotted. Uh, okay, he has a stethoscope around him, but the appearance, no, it doesn't add up. He has no ID, no credentials, nothing. This person is definitely fake, and that's a giant red flag. So now, when we imagine the scenario of a real doctor, we will see that everything checks out. The doctor has a proper attire. They're wearing the ID, their credentials check out, and everything works out. So in this particular case, there are no red flags. The purpose of knowing what a red flag is very important. So I'm going to ask you a simple question, and it's a red flag for me and for you. And most times people don't see this. Where does it say in the Quran or authentic hadith that whoever does not follow the Mahdi or the Messiah when they come becomes a non Muslim? If I don't pay zakat, do I become a non Muslim? Or I become a violator of that particular command? What happens if I don't fast? Do I become a non Muslim? So, where does it say that not following the Mahdi or the Messiah makes you a non Muslim? That's the question. It's a red flag for me. because people have assumed something is very dangerous. So there are red flags virtually in every single thing when it comes to false messiahs, and that's something we need to find and investigate. To do that, I'm going to take another example before we jump into our topic today, is something called the ant quiz. And it's very simple. So let's imagine three ants walking together, one behind the other. So the ant in the front, it says there are two ants behind me. So if you look closely, you will find that there are two ants right behind. It's perfect, it checks out. Now, the ant in the center says there's one behind me and one in the front. And this also checks out, as you can see. Whereas the ant at the back says there are three ants ahead of me. The question is how? So, as you can see from the image, that there are only two ants in front. There's no third ant. So, what happens in this particular case is people with intelligence and logic, they will try to solve this. They will sit down, they will put their heads together, they will do all kinds of maths to understand how this works. But they won't consider a simple possibility that it's a lie, that the ant has lied. Now, what has happened is intelligent people sat down and discussed over and over again to see what possibilities are there. In simple terms, there's no possibility there, it's just a lie. So, what happens when you are faced with a lie? And when you're faced with that lie, you understand that I have no alternative except to just call it a lie because there's no way to prove this because it doesn't get proven anyway. Similarly, in the 1800s in India, Mirza Ghulam Ahmad Qadiani, I've shortened his name here, he created a new entity actually. And that entity today is monetizing faith. And his claim was he's 13 plus people in him. 13 plus people in him. We'll discuss them as we come to them. We've looked at this in the last episode as well. 13 plus entities. And the proof he gave for that is zero. There was no proof. His own books and the fact that he said, God speaks with me, and all kinds of abstract proofs that he could provide. And we will look into each of these things in detail. And so he gave a claim, and he said, there's a proof, which is my own books. God speaks to me, and my failed prophecies, for instance. Yeah. And the demand was, follow me or be doomed. And to follow me, so you all that you have to do is take the bayat and start paying chanda, wasiyat, and so on. Financial system yet again. Um, 13 plus people. We talked about the gradual claims. Uh, we'll talk about them here as well. So, like any sensible person will say the same thing. This can't be right. But people do believe. And by their fruits, you will know them. And this is a common Christian saying, by their fruits, you will know them. So instead of knowing through other ways, we will know him through his actions and the recorded literature that's on him. So, according to the research we have conducted, we have no hesitation in saying that Mirza Ghulam Ahmad did not reveal a plan. He engineered a psychological ladder. He created something deliberately, and it was all calculated. Some parts of it may have been opportunistic, but they were largely deliberate and very calculated. So, our research is about a psychological inquiry into Mirza Ghulam Ahmad's claims, his actions, and possible motives. So, it's a project that is psychological analysis and historical critique of Mirza. Everyone has a right to do it. We have a right to do it too. And so, what we have done, we have explored the life and behavior. We try to understand his motivations, such as ego, health deterioration, cognitive dissonance, superiority complexes, and everything else. And rather than theology, we have based this inquiry to decode his behavior. Because by the fruits you will know them. That's what we try to do. Many Muslims, we are about nearly 2 billion people on earth. Many Muslims feel this false messianic claimants are misleading and hurting religious sentiments. And I don't want to get into that, but you can see why. And our research is very clear on this point, that we need to have a perspective which is different to the one that's being generated at this stage. And we want to be respectful. We want to inform people, educate, and give a new way of looking at things. And we have said this over and again, and we will say this once more here, that we are not in any form or shape promoting any kind of hate or misunderstanding of an individual or group, regardless of who it is. We think constructive dialogue can take place. We can argue. We can deliberate. Sorry. We can put our points together based on facts, and that's what we should be doing anyway. We've been asked this question repeatedly, and we have multiple reasons why we don't do this, why we don't debate. So there's no debate. And there are many platforms they are actually debating. I don't see it's wrong or right. It's just that we don't do it. And there are several reasons, one of them being when the followers come in, there's a slight different dynamic. Now, when the leader is alive, they have a targeted group that they speak with, including the followers, non followers. They have opponents to them, so they will be constantly engaging with the opponents, and they will have questions that they will answer. But as time goes on, generations add up, and then you come to a point where the leader is gone. So their officers, if you will, the ones who are running the show at this stage, they become in charge of the whole thing. And they have followers and non followers. They have questions. They have research on the leader, which people will independently do, like we are doing it. And they will have a position. What we have noted, and this is true for all groups, the fringe groups, they will introduce new interpretations, new meanings, new evidences. Some of them, even the leader didn't even claim. So they might come up and say something that the leader never knew, never claimed. You will find such examples. And this is a very common practice, and it's a predictable pattern in post founder religious cults. When the leader is no longer there, they have to keep the energy alive. So they will have to bring new evidences all the time, new titles, all that. So debating these people is pointless for us because they are trying to protect what they are they've been doing. So we would like to talk to the leader. We don't want to talk to them because there's no point. And we already heard what they have to say. And if you compare this behavior to religions, I'm going to take only one ayat from Surah Al-Kahf. Allah says that وَقُلِ الْحَقُّ مِنْ رَبِّكُمْ, that the truth is from the Lord. O Prophet, this is the truth from your Lord. فَمَنْ شَاءَ فَلْيُؤْمِنْ, and the one who wills to believe, let him believe. وَمَنْ شَاءَ فَلْيَكْفُرْ, and whoever wills, let them disbelieve. So, and there's no pressure in the deen. So we are not here pushing people. Yes, there is a command to argue bil ahsan, which is in goodness, to make an argument, to have a point discussion. But debating is not something Islam encourages when it basically is pointless. And we can argue, we can talk, we can exchange ideas. That's not a problem. So for us to tell the truth, Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam said, "Balaghu anni walau ayah." Just pass one ayah, even if it is from me. And convincing is not our job. The groups do that. That's why they have to keep increasing the pressure on people to believe. We're not here for that. We just put it across. Whether you believe, whether you don't believe, that continues to be your matter with you and Allah. When we proceed further, the group that Mirza Ghulam Ahmad left behind, uh, this is something interesting, and you'll probably find this in many of the debates. If you watch them, is they do not discuss him or his writings. They don't discuss Mirza at all. They use classic misdirection, and I'll tell you what that is in just a second. And we need evidence, not narrative. So if someone has broken a window, we don't want to hear 50 things about broken windows, how that has been a historical fact, and so on. We just want to know what happened here. We don't need narratives. And that's not how religions are built, with narratives. And that's what's really happening at this stage. So those 2 points hopefully clarified the issue that we are not interested in debates. We'll produce our research, ask questions, we'll answer them if I have to. Um, then again, we proceed further and we look here into what is classic misdirection. So there are questions, yeah? Who is Mirza? What's your proof? And so on. So what do? They send you somewhere else. What is it? Did Isa ibn Maryam die a natural death? Was he in Kashmir? Is he alive in heaven eating what? When is he coming down? Is he going to return physically, metaphorically? No, we're not talking about Hazrat Isa. We're talking about Mirza Ghulam Ahmed. We need to know about him. No, no, we're not talking about him. We go to Quran. We'll find whether a Nabi can come or not. The point that Nabi is going to come or not doesn't mean anything. If this particular person is not the one we should be talking about, then what's the point of all of this? Then we look into this as a classic misdirection, which basically means pointing in the other way. If you've watched a movie or something that you've seen someone chasing and then they say he went the other way, which was the wrong way, and then that's misdirection, pointing in a direction that's not true. Now, Mirza Ghulam Ahmad's actions, people argue is divine, and majority of the people argue that they're not. In this particular context, there's been academic and theological discussions proving from ahadith and Quran and so on. We are looking at it from point of view of psychology. So theological, there's a lot of work on it. Imtiaz Bhai has done a great job. Dawa Bhai obviously, and so many other people. I can't really take all their names, but Adnan Rashid Bhai, and so the work has been extensive. But psychologically, we are trying to put across to you that this isn't a normal person we're dealing with, and why we choose to go with the claimant before the claim. Why we want to discuss Mirza before we discuss any of his claims. This is the most important phenomenon, actually. This is a hypothetical scenario. Someone walks up to the door and says, "Your mother is my wife. She's been married to me before." So, as a dutiful son, what do? You bring your mother to the door and face to face, let's discuss this and sort this out now. Nobody does that. In fact, the son will do the responsible thing of uh, knowing what this person is saying and taking an action by calling the police or whatever. Because you don't bring your mother to the door to confront a madman. You don't bring the Quran and the Ahadith into the door to discuss one person who is not making sense. The Quran and Ahadith are sacred. We don't bring them to the door. Every single time somebody says, "I'm a Nabi," you start taking the Quran and Surah Al Jum'ah means this or this Hadith means that. We don't do that. We want first the person who is in question to be discussed, and then we will talk about the rest. And what is happening today, unfortunately, is people are caught in this circus of debating whether his interpretations and meanings and narratives, while the Jamaat that Mirza created continues free of any kind of accountability to take people out of Islam in the name of Islam by calling themselves true Muslims. And they're running a private wealth fund on a global scale, which is Chanda and Wasiyat. And persecution of communities and violation of human rights. We have heard several testimonies. I'm not saying they're doing it to every single individual. I can't make that claim. But the Sheikh Saab is an example, and he will give you enough evidence. So, based off of that, this is a statement that I'm making here that there is persecution of people who leave them, and this is happening in the name of religion of Islam that they have created. And again, they don't discuss Mirza in that. So it's a fabricated spiritual authority. Allah has not given them anything to control people in this manner. So the principle of investigation is follow the evidence and source before the subject, claimant before the claim. That's the way it works, right? You should always check the source before the subject. I'll give you certain examples so it becomes clear to you. In law, a witness credibility established before the testimony is accepted. So you should know whether the witness was in fact there before the testimony can be accepted. In science, is the same. The source of data before the analysis is accepted. Let's go to Ahadith. The chain is first established. Have you not seen any Hadith? You will see it from so and so to so and so, and then the content of the Hadith is discussed. So if there is no isnad, there is no chain, then what's the point of discussing that Hadith? So we need to know the person we are talking about. If we don't know that person, then there's no point of discussing anything further. So the question is, who is Mirza Ghulam Ahmad Qadiani? According to me, 3 years ago, I didn't know much about him. I only knew someone claimed to be a Mahdi and people follow him. And so that was my perception of him. And so, as it led, long story short, I got to know him a little bit through his literature and so on. And by interacting with some people from the group, and so I was introduced to the concept of Mehdi and so on. But the shocking thing came to me. I'm going to be brutal this time, so please, it's not intended to again cause any kind of misunderstanding or any kind of pain. But it's true that I have to share this with you, so you understand what is the consequence of this. This is the first thing that I found out about him that truly shocked me. I know people read this and hear it regularly, so probably become immune to it. And he says that I became pregnant through divine inspiration. He became pregnant. Okay, it's not pregnancy referring to something else. And he says, after experiencing the pains of labor, I gave birth to myself as the Messiah. I gave birth to myself as a Messiah, and pregnancy and so on. It was bizarre. I mean, to say the least, right? I mean, you could argue that no normal person on earth is going to speak in this manner. So, let alone a person who claims to be, religious, let alone a person who claims to be a saint, let alone a person who claims to be a nabi, and all the claims that he's made. This was very difficult for me to understand. And to this day, I don't know why people don't talk about this one particular aspect. Yes, I know they have replied to this in their own silly ways, but no, it doesn't make sense. Especially because the next slide that I'm going to present, I'm doing it very carefully to give the people the real impression of what this sounds like. And this is this image of a man who's pregnant. This is not the image of Mirza, so I have not used his image. And this is just a made up image of an individual to show people that that's what he's saying. I became pregnant. For some months, the details are 10 months or something. I'm not recollecting at this stage, but that's how he said it. Now, put that together with this. There is no documented record of anyone in any religion, a man claiming to have transformed into a woman, got pregnant, delivered someone, even in a dream. So the absurdity of this is just phenomenal. Like, I mean, you look at this and say, am I shocked or am I shocked? This is really very difficult to understand. Just imagine your spouse talking in this manner, your father saying this to you, your teacher saying this to you. What do you think? What would you do? Would you sit and say, yeah, that's absolutely accurate? Or you will say, we need to call a doctor very quickly? I don't know. I mean, I think at this point in time, everything should stop and we should start asking what's happening psychologically here. And that's really what has not happened. I'm not going to get into this aspect of discussion, but because we're going to do this later on anyway. All Muslim children, they learn the Surah Al-Fatiha, Surah Al-Ikhlas, Surah Al-Nas, and all of these small surahs very, very quickly, very early on in life. And one of the best examples of Tawheed is Surah Al-Ikhlas, where Allah says that He's, Ahad, Allah is one, and so on, and says that Allah has not begotten anyone through Him. There is no child. Yet you find this in the writings of Mirza. I'm only going to read a little bit of it here. Two parts. The whole thing is pretty absurd. I mean, if you read the whole thing, which we will do later on anyway, I'm just going to show you the initial impacts that I've had, which were shocking to me. So I say, what is going on here? The first part here is God is saying to Mirza in his ilham, "Tu mujhse hai aur main tujhse hu," which basically translates literally in English, "You are from me and I am from you." What does that mean? In Surah Al-Ikhlas, Allah says there's no one. And this ilham that Mirza is presenting is, is exactly the opposite of that. I mean, the absurdities are all there. But when I was hearing it, you can imagine a person who's hearing this, doing the research and thinking, what is going on here? Yeah. And then it carries forward and says, Khuda, like God is going to prove how he is going to become a chosen one and how God is going to make him honored. And one of the things he says in here, if you understand Urdu, you can read it, but I've done a little bit of translation in here. When we actually come to these things, we will have full translations for you. He says that God will make the world do hamd osana to you, to Mirza. So the world will do hamd osana to him. Do you know we have not even done hamd to Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam? It's only for Allah. Hamd is only for Allah. The name Muhammad is the one who did hamd. The one who is, if you look at hamd itself, I mean, there's a really nice lecture by Noman Ali Khan on this one. I have learned a lot just by watching that lecture. The word hamd, and this is for Allah. And here Mirza is saying, Allah said to him that I'm going to make the world do hamd to you. And sana as well, yeah, hamd sana. Hamd sana in exclusivity is so sacred, it only meant for Allah and for no one else. No one else, not even the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. Allah, the maximum that you can see for Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, Allah said, Inna Allah wa malaikatahu yusalluna ala nabi. That's a salawat. Here it's hamdosana. When I combine this, getting pregnant, I am from you, you are from me, God saying, hamdosana for him. And this is just like maybe a tiny stone in the middle of ocean. I mean, there's millions of other things that he said. And conveniently, this is why when you look at this, the group don't want to discuss him. Because how are you going to make sense to people in 2025? What Harry Potter language are you going to use for us to be convinced? Anyway, we move forward because we have a lot to do today. I don't want to be caught up on this, but these are very important points. The origin of my study into Mirza psychologically. So I knew at that point of time discussing theology is futile. Just need to get into psychology here. Let's move forward. So the petri dish. To fully understand Mirza, we must go back to the time he was born and raised, and all the claims he made. Without that, we are just looking at a plant in the middle of a desert. It's not going to work. We need to know where this came from. What was the beginning of it? How did he get these ideas? Who were with him? Everything else. To understand his claims, his methods, his followers, his impact, everything. We will do that in detail. So, without further ado, let's jump into this. 19th century India. We are talking about 19th century India here. Let's look at this is city of Kolkata in India. If you look at this image right now, you can see a lot of traffic. I mean, that's not unusual. Many large cities have this. Just look at the sidewalk on this side, the people on the sidewalk. You don't find an inch of space that you can see. And this is the population density of the city, Kolkata, in India. I don't know the date on this one. I think it's pretty recent by the looks of the cars. This is India, Kolkata in 1880. You can see the difference, how big of a difference it was in 1880. So it was very scarcely populated. Population is there, but not as much. And we are talking about an India that was very, very um, different to the India that we have today. So if you understand at that time, you will understand virtually everything. So the key contributing factors we'll look into are, first of all, the British colonial rule. We'll look into the society. We will look into religion and the intellectual ferment at the time. These three factors, there are more, but we'll look into these. They're interesting, and they will give a good idea as to what has really happened. So the significant basis of society at the time was divided into two groups, essentially. That was the hierarchy, and that was called the zamindari system. Zameen means land, and zamindari means the people who own land. So there was a system created. I'm going to just show you in the next slide. And this was also the basis of control by the British. because they were collecting land revenues. We'll talk about that as well. This is a beautiful image. The credits are there. So land. Um, what does land mean? We can see land virtually everywhere, but what does it mean? In those times, this represents the zamindars, the people who own the land, and this represents the farmers who worked on it. So for the zamindars, obviously it meant a lot of money because that's what it was. But besides money itself, it was honor, it was power, it was status and control. So people pride themselves by calling themselves zamindars because it's a status thing. You own land. For the peasant, the farmer, it represented hope. It represented an identity. That's all that represented. They never really received that much money. So it was a system built to convert natural common rights, which is into cash flows. I mean, have you seen whale paying any rent or elephant paying any rent? No. The only creature which has managed to tax what is given to us for free is mankind. And we have found ways of taking Allah's land and turning it into a commodity. I'm saying it's good or bad. No, I'm saying that's what we managed to do. And this land has become sort of a trade, and it's been so for a long time. But in colonial India, it was very different, as you will see now. So the farmers work on the land. They cultivate the land. The zamindars sit on top of these people. So the lands actually are owned by the zamindars. So the farmers only work on the land. And the crown sits on the top, the British crown, and they allocate the lands to zamindars, and zamindars in turn control it by giving it to or the farmers. And we can see here that the farmers will pay a tax to the crown, the British crown, and portion of the tax actually ends up going to the zamindars. If you see in here, the British actually received up to 50% of their total revenue worldwide from all their territories, from India alone, just from this zamindari tax. So let's look at this little bit more detail. So the land tax is the tax that the farmers are paying as a right to stay on the land and to do cultivation. So whatever money that they make is theirs, but a percentage goes. And they never really collect anything. And you'll see why. The potential gains are all on paper. So they have been promised all kinds of beautiful things on paper. In reality, there's very little gain because the land is harsh. They need to cultivate. Rains are unpredictable. So they may need to borrow money, which again comes from a system. So it comes from a tax. They have to pay the taxes, and they have to borrow money from money lenders. So they essentially borrow something, and they keep paying interest after interest, and they never really ever come out of it. And so if they fail to pay, they lose the land. And famines, as you know, there were quite a few of them. Poverty was a real big issue. So there was no cushion for farmers. Yeah, I mean, they really did not have a bank, a microfinancing, or any of that sort of thing. So all that they had was that land to work on and benefit the ones above them. And so it was a promise of security, but in reality, it was just an exploitation. The zamindari system was terrible. I mean, my personal opinion of it is it's just a horrible system that existed for many, many years. Now we'll look into that in detail. So 15 to 20% people own lands. The zamindars were 20%, 15 to 20%. To understand that number, take a look at this. This many people in there, only these are zamindars. So you can imagine the rest of them are just working for these people. The 20% is what they are working for. The rest of them have nothing in their hands. So let's look at this. So land was, it's a common right, yeah? I mean, would you not expect that? That you're born in a country, you should at least have something for yourself. But no, you don't. So it became a private taxable unit. And that's how clever it was. A clever scheme to take a common right of a person and turn it into something that's taxable. The land use was cash extraction, so you have to get money out of it. And it's not for community anymore. And you can see that why. For the peasant, it's absolutely lose lose. If you don't work on the land, you're losing. If you work on the land, it's a risk. but you will have to take that chance. And for the elites, the zamindars, it's a win-win, because on one hand they are giving the land, they're getting the money, they have favors from the British, and at the same time, if the money is being lent out, more benefits. So it was just a self-perpetuating system where the poor never really had a chance. Um, so let's look at whether I make sense with that. So let's look at 20% landlord. How do they look? These are all images from the net, so the credit is for them. These aren't AI generated. So zamindars probably look like this. So you can see their dresses are nice. They're all healthy looking, right? Just compare them to the 80% laborers or the farmers. That's how they looked. I mean, so you imagine a vast majority of the population look like that. Okay, let's look at how the families probably look like. Again, these are actual pictures. On the left hand side is a picture of a zamindar family. You can see the dress, the health, everything else. On the right hand side, you can see a picture of a family of peasants in rural part of India in those days. So you can instantly compare the difference between the two of them. That's significant. This is a house where zamindars probably would stay. Not exactly one, but this is largely what the houses they will live in. Compare this to the houses the peasants live in, and these are the better houses. That's a house that a peasant would probably live in, and they'll be very happy doing that because at least they have a roof over their head. And this may not look like much, but this is prime luxury property, I guess, at the time. So you can see the emergence of the difference in the system, and that's only done from the land itself, the use of the land. Let's go further and take a look at India in 1880. Some of the statistics with relation to that. So the males were, life expectancy was about 25 to 27 for poor people. Uh, Others like mixed bag of, like slightly above the poverty line would be 40 to 45. They live that much. The upper class will be about 50 to 65. And the literacy rates are very, very low, as you can see. Even the upper class, about 10 to 15%. Now, this number is going to be super important. So please don't forget that. The life expectancy 50 to 65 is really important. So the land ownership, as I mentioned to you, 15 to 20%. Land ownership determined status, power. We talked about that. And then British had a habit of conducting surveys in their territories. But the most extensive ones, they did it in India because it's a big territory. It was a very important territory for them for many reasons. We'll talk about them in the next few slides. There's a particular survey by Ibbotson, and it was in 1881. And he highlighted that there was an interviewing of customs and religion, which means Hindus were practicing Muslim things and Muslims were doing the same for Hindu things. So there was this crossover habits. So they would inevitably perform certain things. I'm not really sure what they would be, but just an idea if you understand that. And this is also going to be super important. So please remember, these are important notes. So let's look at the zamindars, the people who own the land, uh, just see what they look like and how they behaved. So the landowners, obviously 15 to 20%, the domination mindset, because, obviously you got the land. So everybody else is looking up to you. So you are definitely entitled. So as you can tell from our society of today, we judge people on God's favor by how much money they have. We think poor people are suffering because God don't like them. And so it was not very different then. I'm sure it was much worse. So they always felt divine entitlement. Oh, God is with me. That's why I'm so rich. Because born as poor clearly means you've done something wrong in your past life, and that's why you ended up being a poor person's son. And so the zamindars will obviously have a dominant mindset. The British colonial practices, made them tax collectors. So they obviously started getting more and more money. And so they would also have loans given out to these farmers and then collect interest after interest, and the principal never got paid. So they could force people out of their land or, any kind of thing. So you can imagine the mindset of the people who conducted this. I'm not saying this particular image of this person here was that. It's just a reference image. So that the zamindars were healthy, they were living good lives. We go back to the farmers, which was the majority of the population, really. Submissive mindset, fear, resignation, a sense of powerlessness, what they can do. They have no money. They're always on the mercy of others. And so they're hoping for a better tomorrow, and that's pretty much what they can do. So illiteracy rate is high. We talked about that. If you're not familiar, not educated, then it affects you in many different ways. We'll talk about them later on as well. But least of all, you will not be confident enough. You will always be dependent on others, and so on. So where would they go? They will have to go to village priests to ask for blessings, to the landlord to beg for whatever they needed, and it was basically for them a dependency life. And so they developed sort of superstition, myths, and all of that. And that's we're going to look at that very quickly now. So I won't spend much time on this, but so you can imagine the mind frame of these people. In fact, I'm going to go to Rabindranath Tagore, who has written a poetry. I've given the reference down here. It's a reflection of the times, really. And I didn't want to create a sort of more emotions to this, but I think it's a point worth mentioning that it's a poem about a person called Upin, and he's a farmer. So the landlord is asking him to sell his land, and so he says, "It was just a small piece of land that all I had. The rest are all lost to pay for the loans I had. Sir, did you?" So the landlord is asking, "Did you get it, Upin? I'll buy your piece of land." So Upin replies, "You are the lord of the land. Countless are your lands. Look at mine. I hardly have a plot to bury myself when I die." So this was the greed of the landlords, and this is the difficulties or challenges of being a kisan. Having said that, this is a hypothetical image of zamindar living his lavish life. What do you think his greatest fears is going to be? The greatest fear this person can have is loss of land or wealth. That's the greatest fear. And how are you going to maintain that land? By appeasing the British. That's the only way. The land is with you not because of any, okay, there's inheritance and so on, but you are getting the land because British are happy with you. And then there's a system behind it, zamindari system. So in order for this zamindar not to become this, he has to appease the British, and that's the greatest fear that they would have. So the zamindar to kisan fall will be absolutely insane, you know, losing all the wealth, all the status. It was just not like loss of money. It's basically existential threat. A person falling from that level is doomed, because today, wealth loss is survivable. You can get all kinds of assistance. You can declare bankruptcies. You can have a secondary job. You can drive an Uber. You can do freelance teaching. You can do multiple things. But back in the days, loss of wealth from that level clearly meant it was all over for you, because there were no other assets. The entire thing is gone. So when a zamindar is faced with such a consequence, they become extremely desperate. The fear of losing is worse than losing in this case for them. So let's look at the British Raj. I'm talking about the Raj at the time. I'm not referring to any policy or government of today. I'm talking specifically based on evidence of what was in the past. The map, the colored areas represent the British territory around the world. So if you want to know where UK sits, the Great Britain is right here, and this is where India is. So you can clearly see much of the world is between them. So it's a long drive, if you will. But India was a jewel in the crown. It was something worth keeping, because they had a massive revenue, which was, I told you about the land, and because India has been an agriculture country, so the land obviously would be valuable. And then again, it was also of strategic importance for many reasons. Since this is not a history thing, I'm not going to get into that, but to tell you, that's how far they were, and it was very important for them. Then India itself represented a few things for the British. It was a big sized country, we can see now. Um, and it has diverse population. Ibbotson survey, people following all kinds of traditions, multiple religions, superstitions and myths and so on. But there was also a problem for the British, the resistance. Obviously, when you are a power colonizing a country, people are going to fight back. And so, again, there's another point that we're going to come back to this resistance part in a little tiny bit. But prior to that, we'll look at communication. Communication is important. If you have such a big distance, then you need to have effective communication. In 1870, the British Indian telegraph system was fully enabled. It was operational, which means India was linked to Britain. Telegraph is very similar to telephone, uh, which basically means it's essentially two-way communication. But it isn't what you think it is. This is the machine that people used to send telegraphic messages. And that's the device that they tap onto using the finger in a specific way, and it gives uh, the signals to the other side. It's a code, and then you the other device enable to play the code and so on. The way it worked was this way: the event happens in Great Britain, the newspapers will pick it up, and then it goes to the press offices, who will use the telegraph to send it to India via the Indo-European telegraph line, which was established, and the time it take was 8 hours roughly. That the news will go from one end to the other end, and it will be received in Calcutta, or which is today Kolkata, Bombay or Mumbai, and telegraph office, and then they will locally distribute that news. So this is happening in Britain, and this is happening in India. Now, if you're interested, this was the line. So London to Istanbul, which is Constantinople, then it went to Tehran, Karachi, Bombay, Calcutta, and then local offices. So that's how the messages traveled. So if an event has happened in UK, if anything is in the press in the UK, it will reach India in 8 hours. And it will take maybe a little more time to get press and everything else, and then get into public circulation. But you can imagine anything that's happening in UK, Great Britain at the time, will be available to the Indian readers. This is going to be important later on. So this is a point worth remembering. Resistance, we talked about that. So there was 1857 rebellion. So people were rebelling against the British Raj. They said, we have had enough. And it was also called the First War of Independence, actually. And so there was a significant Muslim involvement in there. And so I think there's a movie on this called Gadar. It was also called the War of Gadar, I think. So you need to look into that. And I'm not here to discuss this particular event. So I'm just going to move forward with the consequences of this event. So when the impact of this event was that the British knew, okay, we need to do something. People are getting restless. There's already a rebellion. So obviously, you need to control people. So informants were placed. Remember this word, informants. Intelligence gathering were, common. Ulamas were, like put in jail, exiled, and all that happened. So the suspicion was high. Anybody maybe making some kind of a speech or whatever would be then targeted. So the religious, um, the religious people were invariably under microscope at this time. So the British were not very happy with them. Okay, we move forward. There was an event happened in Africa, and that was a Mahdi movement in Sudan. Remember the date, 1881. So it was led by a person named Muhammad Ahmad, who was a Sufi, and this name, in fact, correlates to the hadith that it will be a person named Muhammad, and who declared himself Mahdi, and he basically defeated the British forces in Khartoum. There's a long history. I've read all through that from various sources. Eventually, he died as well, but he managed to rise and fight. So obviously, the British were very concerned with this. They said, we don't want another guy to come and claim Mahdi, and we'll have all sorts of problems. Sudan, relatively different country, already 1857, there was something that happened. So just under 20, 30 years, I mean, somebody else can rise. So the British were cautious of the pan-Islamic thing, yeah? So charismatic Muslim leaders, they didn't want them. And talk of Mahdi or jihad, again, a no-no, big no-no. So they were quite averse to that. So after having done that, I mentioned to you about crackdown on ulamas. So they also had another strategy, which was to grant titles, which they could do easily. Titles like calling somebody sir, and official recognition, who preached loyalty, discouraged political activism. So this was what they were trying to do. On one hand, they were cracking down, but you can't crack down everyone, right? So you have to reward some people. So that was the strategy that they had applied. In fact, if a British uh, general at the time were to ask for a Christmas gift, he would ask for a self proclaimed Mahdi who will declare jihad obsolete, preach loyalty to the crown, and framed obedience to colonial authority as obedience to God. If you went in Great Britain and told them that this is what I have, it will be the best gift for the person at the time, because that would solve a bunch of problems for them right away. So the religious ferment for for India at the time. It's very important to know these things. Um, Before that, I'd like to take you into a quick trivia. Electricity arrived in India in 1879. We were talking about 1881 and so on. So 2 years prior to that, electricity arrived in India. And 100% village, just to compare, electrification was completed in 2018, 7 years from today. Just 7 years ago, all villages were given electricity. It's a big country, so you can understand. But there was no electricity in 1879. Mirza was born 1839. So a lot of his early years, until he was 30 years or 40 years by that measure, he spent without electricity. Obviously, they had something which was fire. So they would have lamps and so on. Of course, the rich will have it because it requires oil. So it was mostly dark. When the sun sets, it's darkness, light of the moon. So the darkness, of course, there's poverty and there's fire. People are sitting around having conversations, talking about the day. So the oral traditions and stargazing is happening. In fact, I do think that if the world had electricity from day one, we would not have a majority of superstitions, and we wouldn't even have probably astrology to the extent we have today. So the myths, superstition, and all of that were very, very common because people are just looking at the sky. If they see a star passing by this and something bad happens, they say, "Oh my God, the star was responsible." So there was no electricity, darkness, and they were sitting outside and talking about other things, which basically means all of these churels and all these stories came up. Because what do people do? They're getting bored. They had no Netflix, they had no mobile phones, nothing to do. Sit and talk and exchange ideas and stories. So this is how traditions developed. And I'm not saying that exactly every single story came from here, but you can see the relevance, right? And darkness actually plays a big role in our psyche. It plays a very big role in our psyche. If you notice that people get scared watching horror movies, because horror movies use a lot of darkness, it's not a cinematic thing, it's because it's true. We are genetically programmed to be afraid of the unknown and the dark. And that's because, there could be a tiger, there could be someone behind the bushes. So all of that plays a big factor. So I'm not going to get into that, but interestingly, darkness has a role to play. And the world in those days was super dark. So what happens? Our brains are essentially, uh, pattern machines. We need patterns. So when people do not understand something, especially something scary or uncertain, like we know two objects, but we don't know what's happening in between. So the mind will fill the gap with assumptions. So the mind sees two black or blue boxes. The one in between it doesn't see, it will fill it up. And that's how superstitions are born. I'll give you an example. So you see a black cat on the street, and the same day you have an accident. Now, nobody's going to question whether you're a bad driver. You're going to say, no, the black cat caused it. It was the black cat that did it. Now you have a correlation between a black cat crossing the street to you having bad luck. And since I'm a cat lover, I love cats. I have a cat. So I'm going to defend the cat. So, my lord, the cat is innocent. The black cat is innocent. And in fact, in Britain and Ireland, some Celtic traditions, black cat crossing your path, good luck. But the same thing in India is bad luck. It's nothing to do with the cat. It's just the way people perceive things. Interestingly, in Japan, black cats are seen as symbols of very good luck. especially for ladies who are single. It brings good partners, apparently. So I have a ginger cat. So, black cats are obviously not that bad. So we've come to Sufism. And Sufism, we will in the next episodes, we're going to be discussing what is Sufism, the origin and evolution, the Sufi concepts, why Sufi concepts and their well acceptance into the society has not been discussed so much. I have no idea, but we will be doing it anyway. So we will compare India versus Arabia, why there's more Sufism in this part of the world than in Arabia, and how Sufis mix their practices with local beliefs. I mean, something localizing effect that there is. And this made the environment fertile ground for false messiah claims. And we'll look into all of those aspects. It's interesting. So I don't want an episode only on Sufism, so we will be bringing that flavor into conversation. Sufism in India, major Sufi expansion happened in between 12th and 14th century with the names like Khaja Moinuddin, Baba Farid, Nizamuddin Auliya. To this day, we have people talking about it, visiting the shrines, and so on and so forth. It's mentioned in variety of literature. In fact, when I was discussing uh, with people from the Sikh community, they mentioned to me about Baba Farid being mentioned in Guru Granth Sahib. So I mean, it's all there. I mean, it's part of the history, and it has a role to play. Now, summarizing why people visit Pirs and Babas is because the first step is to seek du'as, prayers, and blessings. It's not wrong, but you can also do the prayers where we don't have the confidence in our dua for whatever reason. We'll talk about that later on, but this is a primary reason why people go. To make sense of confusing event, they want the Baba to tell them, as if the Baba knows. But anyway, to ask for solutions or miracles, karamat. Yeah, I'm using the word miracle here, but it's karamat. They can't do miracles. To reduce fear and anxiety. You know, when you talk to God in tahajjud, you don't know God replied to you. You have to feel it. But if you go to the peer, peer says everything's going to be fine. I looked at it, nothing's going to happen. You feel comfortable. We talk about this as well, the human reassurance factor. And because of family tradition and social pressure, and that's really how I was brought into this. I didn't like it, but my family was in it, so I had to go and so on. I enjoyed it when it lasted, but to give you an idea, some of the things are uh, common, but there are others as well. But the five I think are important are these ones. So people will visit them now, especially in a society with superstition, especially in a society with hardship and confusion, like colonial India, darkness, people falling sick, financial troubles, zamindars on your head, all of that. And you need someone to make sense of this. You just can't imagine your life being so bad. And you might say, why was I born this way? You want some answers. So when they go to the spiritual person, they get blessing, they feel, okay, someone has listened to me, someone has done this with me. And it becomes a sort of an event which gives you hope to fight another day. And that's what people do, especially in difficult times. So that's why people go around these peers, babas, fakirs, sadhus, sons, and so on. And when you look at all of these things in combination, that is the India that I want you to know, where people will die maximum at the age of 65, 27 if they are in a poor category, and they will be practicing religious interchangeable things, believing in superstition, and so on. In 1839, Gurdaspur, Punjab, marked over here in red, Mirza Ghulam Ahmad was born. There's unnecessary confusion about the date of his birth. I don't think there is. We'll prove that as well. And so he was born in this time that I mentioned to you. 1839 is roughly 40 years before India got electricity. So he had a lot of candle lights and lamp lights and so on growing up. And this is the person we're going to talk about and the claims that he has made. So, in the next episode, we will be talking about his family, his father, what he did, and so on. We'll be talking about his birth, and we'll be talking about his early years in detail. We will not be showing his images. We don't need to. We will be using reference images, and not because of any reason, but because we like to be respectful as much as possible. So, Now that you understand India, during the time, you understand the zamindari system, you understand how the society worked, you understand what a red flag is, you understand when a person makes outlandish claims, you should investigate, not just believe. You have seen how prophets never claimed gradually, never took other people's names. So we need to know that true prophets don't. On parting words, I would say that if you know your father, and I say, your father, I found him drinking vodka, speaking Russian, and you know your father doesn't do either of those things, you will instantly realize I'm not talking about your father. This is why we should know our Rabb, our Allah. And how do we know Allah? From what Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam said about him, what Allah, and what the Quran, how Allah speaks. Allah does not say, I'm from you, you are from me. Never it has happened. So when somebody comes and says that to us, we instantly know this person isn't true. That's a red flag because your Rabb doesn't speak that language. Your Rabb is majestic, Malikul Khuddus. Allah doesn't need us. So what if you prayed 5 times? Do you think Allah is benefiting? There is no one on earth who can pressurize Allah into anything. Allah is free from it. Allah is ghani, which means free from everything, even a need of a follower. The way Mirza's writing project Allah is dependent on him. Shouldn't we be dependent on Allah? Aren't we dependent on Allah? So this is a big red flag. When I started my research with him, I knew I was dealing with a person who was psychologically unwell. And my research goes in that direction. I hope you give us an open mind because we are here to help you, keep you informed. Many of the things we have covered in here, hopefully they're not as difficult to understand because they've been in public view for a long time. I apologize if in case um, they sort of cause you any inconvenience, but that's not the intention. We will do the same. We will do it with caution. We'll do it with respect so that you learn. Thank you so much for your time and support. Jazakumullah khair. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.